everybody, I'm Jane of Surface Anthology and Chalk Mercantile. Welcome to my first tutorial of 2024. I want to show you guys how I made these sweet little tags using the Iron Orchid Toadstool Mold, some milk paint. I've got some DIY paints mixed in there, and I also show you how I mix up a custom color of wax. So watch on and be sure to subscribe and click the little notifications bell so you'll be informed when I put out my next tutorial. All right, watch on. Hey there. So when I am working on a project like this where I'm using molds and I'm going to have painted surfaces, the first thing I like to do is, well, ideally when you're using milk paint, the first thing you're going to do is mix your milk paint. It really needs a minimum, absolute minimum of 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes to really start to kind of all meld and have the pigments and minerals absorb the water. Overnight is best, actually. So you would mix your milk paint, then you would make your molds, right? Your Iron Orchid molds. So let's move the giant tags aside. And I've got a brand new mold. I love when I have a new product, right? This is the mushroom or the toadstool mold. So I'm gonna make this one and these, and I might do that one too. I have my trusty cookie or bakery cooling rack, right? I got it at Goodwill. This is where I put my molds to start to dry. Before I glue them on. So I just take some cornstarch, a very fluffy brush that I use just for this, and I dust the insides of the molds. And this is really important because we don't want the paper clay, I'm going to be using the air dry paper clay, to stick. You'll get really, really frustrated. Okay. Give it a little slap. And then I've got my clay. I really try to keep it locked down, airtight, because as its name implies, it's air dry. And if it gets exposed to air, it's going to start drying. And once that happens, you can't reconstitute it with water. I have tried. Okay. So, take out your clay. Just kind of squish it around a little bit. And then I just kind of, you know, like this one, I just rolled it into a tube. Press it in. Grab a little more clay. These are pretty big molds. I love them. I haven't, as I said, I haven't used this one yet. And just press in, press really well. We want the clay to get into all those little nooks and crannies of the design. Okay. Then I just use one of the Iron Orchid burnishing tools to get rid of the excess clay. Just take your time with this. I used kind of a lot of clay for this one. All right. And I'm just trying to kind of even this out so it's as smooth as possible. And remember, this clay is going to shrink. Put your excess back in the bag, and really at all times, just try to keep it as airtight as possible. Then, all we need to do, the moment of truth, as they say, is I bend the mold, right? It's already coming out, as you can see there, and ease that mold out. And there it is. Isn't that fabulous? Then I put it right down onto, let me move this, we have a dark background. I put this right onto my cooling rack. Now, this is a great time if you want to manipulate the mold, if you want to have it like kind of bend maybe the stem. This is a perfect time to do that while it's malleable. So I am going to go ahead off camera, make the rest of my molds, put them on here to start kind of drying out. They're much easier to work with when, and paint. If I were to paint this now, being wet, I'm gonna lose a lot of that detail as I go over it with the brush. I'm just gonna take that detail off the surface. All right, I'll see you back here in a minute. Right now, we're gonna mix up our milk paint. So I've got Miss Mustard Seed Farmhouse White, and I also grabbed my, what I have left of my Toscana and the Strasbourg White, just to whiten this one up so it's not as creamy. And I've got a little bit of water. I collect these little Anchor Hocking, Fire King custard cups whenever I go to Goodwill because they're perfect for this. And I'm just gonna mix it up. So it says, you know, when you read the directions on milk paint, it always says 50-50, right? Half milk paint, half water. And use like room temperature water. Don't use ice cold water. And I find that different colors require different amounts of water. You know, some colors are just really thick, some are really thin. So there's my Strasbourg White. You can see, I'll hold it up to the camera. It's more of a white. All right. So there it is dry, and this is what it looks like. You don't need a lot of paint because we're just doing these two tags. Then, get this out of the way, I just pour in a little bit of water and start like less is more. You could measure it if you want, right? Get out those tablespoons. I do have them. I picked those up at Goodwill also. And I'm just going to add a little bit of water and then mix this around. And something that I didn't do that you should do when you're mixing colors is mix the colors together when they're in the powder form, right? Don't put two colors together, then add water, then mix. It just makes the mixing a little bit harder. And you see, there's a lot of resistance here, right? I'm making a kind of a paste, and all of a sudden it comes together, and I have this kind of blobby paste. It's like making frosting. But I like to get it to this point. Helps to kind of get out the lumps. And then add a little bit more water. And again, just a touch. Mix that up. And then all of a sudden it'll just get really creamy and really beautiful. Now this is still too thick. Right, just a little bit too thick. So I'm going to add just a touch more water. And I'm going to tell you, as you leave this, right, we don't just start painting with it all of a sudden. We're going to mix this up. I just throw a piece of like saran wrap or a piece of wax paper over the top, and I just leave this And when you do that, you're going to come back and you're going to see it's gotten thicker. So you're going to have to add a little bit more. Most of the time, you're going to have to add a little bit more water, right? But look at how beautiful that is. Beautiful, beautiful paint. So now I'm going to take out my tongue depressor, cover this up, go grab a cup of coffee, let it sit for, again, at least 15 to 20 minutes. Best is overnight. An hour is really good too. You're going to see a big difference in the texture of the paint. All right, it's been just about an hour and a half. My paint looks great. I did add a touch, like a half a teaspoon of water to this, and it's just beautiful. It's kind of like, I guess, between like buttermilk. You know, we all try to, you know, what is this like, right? We don't want it to be too thick, but mine's kind of dripping down. All right, so I'm just using my little 1-inch brush here. Here's our plywood tag. So yeah, just paint it on. And this paint has great coverage. Plywood, any kind of raw wood loves milk paint because it just absorbs it and is very, very happy. Now, when you are painting something like this, or frankly any kind of wood, you run the risk of it cupping or warping, right? Because one side is wet and the other sides are not. So let this dry and then paint the other side. Okay. That's how easy it is, right? So there it is. Really good coverage here. Let me show you what it looks like. I did the other one. This one has 2 coats on this side and 1 coat on this side. And you can kind of see, these are laser cuts. You see that kind of burn mark there. But it looks really good. It's not a super bright white. I didn't want a super bright white, but I didn't want anything that was too creamy because I think I'm going to be using white paint on the mushrooms. So I need a little bit of difference there. Now let's place our mushrooms. I'm going to put my brush in some water. Actually, now I am. I'm like, oh, I'll leave it out. And when I go off camera, I'll finish the other side. Okay, so these are still wet, but they've got some body now. They've been drying out. So I could still bend them a little bit if I want. This is always so much fun, is doing creating your composition. Extra clay there. So I don't know, so there's one. Let's try. And if these crack or break, don't worry, we're gluing them down. You could just glue them right down. Let's check out these other ones. Because you'll see where the real vulnerable points are. Those are a little bit too much of the same. All right, how sweet is that? All right. And this is, I should have, you know, I can sit and mess around with composition all day long. And the thing about these tags is they're really narrow, right? They're not wide. And I love to work horizontally, so there's a vertical. That's good for me. All right, I think that's really sweet. So what I'm gonna do is glue them down. I'm using Tite Bond glue, right? There's Tite Bond. I have a old natural bristle brush that's pretty stiff. And if you're worried about placement and remembering where you place them, you could take a picture with your cell phone, refer to that. You can take a little piece of chalk and mark these out. You can use a friction pen, which disappears with heat, and literally outline them and then glue them back down like that. There's many different ways to do that. All right, now I think I'm gonna move these down. And I love to look up at the camera because then I can see my composition in my camera and see if I like it, and I do. So I'm not going to use a brush. I'm just going to squeeze this right out on here. And I keep the glue towards the middle. I don't spread it all the way out so I don't get the glue halo. Sometimes I still do if I put too much on. I love Tite Bond. I also love Aleene's Tacky Glue. Now remember, these are still wet, so I can kind of press down. Same thing. And then turn this around. And you have time to play with it. It's not the end of the world if you get a little glue halo. You could just go back over it with some paint. And then I'm just pressing these down. And I am getting a little bit of glue coming out, very, very slightly. And if it bothers me, I'll just take a little bit of that milk paint and go back over it. Okay, one more. This little tiny one. And that's it, you guys. That's how easy it is, right? We're not done yet. I'm going to be doing a lot more to this, but there's the placement of these mushrooms on this. I'm going to let this dry overnight. To start painting on it, I might as well get these nice and dry. They're placed where I want them. And they'll be so much easier to paint when they're completely dry, and they also will have shrunk as much as they're going to when they're completely dry. Alrighty, I painted or began painting one of my large tags with the mushrooms with the toadstool mold, right, from Iron Orchid. And you can see I've used some metallics there. And it's not done. I added the ribbon because I want to see what it looks like and, you know, what else I want to add to this. But I'm really, really having a ball. I'm using these metallics. I'll show you in a minute. These metallic watercolors that I just love. So let's go ahead and paint this one. Now these are completely dry, right? So I glued them down. I do have a little bit of a halo that glue. I don't know if you could see it, but it's like right there. It shows up here and there. So let me get a little bit closer. Close up of my arm. And even closer. That looks good. So what I do, I'm actually using, I switched from milk paints over to DIY paint. This is Debbie's Design Diary DIY paint, which is like a gouache to me. So a kind of opaque opaque watercolor. And what I do is I folded my wax paper over, put the colors down that I want to use, that I might use, and I put some little blobs of them out. And then what I do, this is a trick from back when I was in art school, I just have a spray bottle, a mister bottle, and I mist these just to keep them wet because they will start to skin over like pudding, and we don't want that. Okay, and I've got all my different artist brushes. They work great. So here it is, and I think what I want to do with this one is do a red top, and I don't want like a tomato red, so I'm using Kissing Booth by DIY, which is a very kind of magenta color. My water is getting really bad. Try to keep your water fresh. All right, so I'm just dipping my brush in my water. I have little containers all over the place. You can see there's a little bit of the gold in there. That's okay. And get my paint in here. There we go. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of water to the paint. And remember, I sprayed the top. And the other thing to think about is that this is the pure dry, air dry clay, which is a paper clay. So it's gonna be very, very absorbent. All right, and then I just start painting. And let's see if I could do this because I was moving this around a lot in my hands, the other one. And just take your time. Don't have an espresso before you do this because you don't want your hands to be shaking. You want them to be nice and steady. You could paint your mushrooms before you glue them down. But because these are such big molds, I wanted them to kind of mold to the surface. That's why I put them down wet. Let's just go around that side a little bit. All right, so there's the top. This is so much fun, you guys, I have to admit. All right, next one I want to do, and I'm going to leave this brush down, is this one. And I think I'm going to use the pink, and this is called Petticoat Pink. Same thing, brushing in a little bit of that water. And just painting this out. Now you could see my mushroom, very 3D, right? It's lifting off here, which I wanted. I could have pushed it down when I glued it. But when you do that, you know, make sure it's something you're going to hang on the wall that's not going to be touched a lot, because you don't want it to break. And you can use watercolor on these. You can use, this is a clay-based paint I'm using. You could use acrylics, fusion, mineral paint. You could do the whole thing in milk paint. You could use oil paints. That would be cool. Okay. So I got a little bit of the pink on my white stem, and all I need to do is grab another brush, dip it in my white paint, because I want to add a little bit of white paint to the stems anyway, and just go over that. I'm using a very wet kind of almost wash of this white paint. Did I just keep adding? Let me turn this around. Actually, I'm not going to turn it around because you know what's going to happen. Something's going to happen. I don't have a proper palette. Something's going to happen, and my paints are going to go everywhere. So I just added some water to the DIY. I mixed white swan and beadboard to get the white that I'm using, because DIY doesn't really have like a bright white. So I didn't want anything too creamy, because we already have this creamy base. Where's my mister? I love that mister. I use it for everything. So I'm kind of just putting this base of this white down because I am going to be adding a little bit of gray. Let's get my dog's hair off of there. So I want a kind of a base, or not a kind of a base, but an actual base to paint into. Okay, so move this over. So like I did on this one, right, I've got a lot of gray kind of that I blended up. I added some metallics after, a little bit of gray and white underneath. I'm going to be doing the same thing here. So I'm going to start with the gray. And I'm, of course, just using some of that white. Right, and then I'm just going to add a little black in there. Somewhere I have a really nice an antique porcelain palette that I have had since art school. I don't know where it is, but boy, I could use it right about now. Okay, so I mixed up my gray over here, keeping it loose. And I'm just going to add a little bit of a gray wash, kind of starting at the bottom up, especially over on this main mushroom. So I'm just going to kind of blob it on the bottom, brush that up. just like that. And for this little one, I'm just going to put it right on, literally, on the bottom of the mushroom. And I'm just, again, kind of doing little points, little dots of it. So this is just the beginning. I'm just kind of blobbing that, placing it around. And then I'm going to come over here to the underside of the main mushroom. And I'm going to actually add more water because I want this to be more of a wash. And I'm just filling out, kind of flooding that part of the mushroom. And it starts to give our mushrooms some dimension, right? It's a lot of fun. Then I'm just kind of looking at this. I really don't have a plan. I'm just, you know, playing, really. Okay, and then I'm going to come back with a little bit of white, and I'm using the same brush. A little bit of white. And this just kind of softens the gray, right? You could come back and put a little bit of white in there. So you see what I'm doing there, right? And it just adds dimension. The more you kind of play around with this, the more that will happen for you. I'm going to do something underneath this little pink mushroom. Pick up some of the gray. And I keep turning this over. It just makes it easier. And I'm just going to go in there. And don't freak out if you're like, oh my God, I've got too much paint. You can grab some of that pink and soften it. But, you know, it just adds a little bit of dimension, right? A little more dimension. And I like to just go around the edges. Make sure I don't have any bright white sticking out. The other place now I'm going to go into, but with some darker gray, is this back part of that red mushroom. And I don't want it to be too washy because the thicker it is, the more control you have of the paint. So you see what I'm doing. I use my pinky. right? So like another kind of bit of dimension you're adding to it. And this is all clay paint. This is all furniture paint I'm using. Okay, so look at how far the mushrooms have come, right? The next thing I want to show you is how I did this background, right? And again, it's just gray paint. And I just wanted to kind of, you know, this is very flat, the milk paint base. So before, actually, I want to add, before I do that, add a little bit of, I think this is a little bit more opaque, that Kissing Booth it's called, that's the color. And you see how fast it dries because the paper clay is super absorbent. Okay, now let's get to that background. And I'm looking for, well, I'm gonna use this brush. This is kind of a small brush for this, but I don't have one of the larger ones around me that's clean right now. So I'm using this, we'll see what happens. Again, into the gray that's mixed with white. And I just kind of, I drag my brush around. And it just gives it, you know, and obviously you don't have to do that in gray, right? You could maybe choose another color. Anything you want. It's your own little world. Didn't Bob Ross used to say that? So I'm truly using this paint like watercolor. And it is a water-based paint. It's perfect for this. And you can just come over and add just some washes. This has started to kind of dry, but if you do this when it's still wet, you can, you know, kind of move the paint, the pigment around. But we're popping those mushrooms right off the tag, popping them off the tag, right? And tools are everything. Because I'm using a small brush, I'm getting these, you know, small little squiggly lines, right? And if I used a larger brush, it would be very, very different. But pretty, right? It's just, this is such a fun mold. Now, the other thing I did over on this tag, let's wrap that, is I just did kind of a little repeat pattern, very, very pale around the edge. So we can do that with this one. Mix up a little bit more paint here. You see how I'm dragging my water across? Don't do that. Keep everything on one side because you're really risking, you know, dropping, getting drips, all that awful stuff. So don't do as I say, not as I do. And I say that a lot. Okay, so let's see how this is. And I just did just a little curve there. And I'm not loading my brush up as I go. I'm not putting it back in the paint. Thinking that maybe it will get lighter, but it's not. I just kind of dotted it up there. Right, let's do the other side. And yep, I'm turning it over so it's going to look slightly different, but you know, I'm not a machine. I'm not going for a manufactured look. I just want a nice little edge. My brush is like, the little point is not happy. It's kind of splitting a little bit. See that? So that affects how it looks. It's okay. And I'm going to do the bottom. And it just gives it like a little bit of a finish. I just think it's fun. I love doing stuff like that. The other thing you could do, you could dip the little bottom of your brush into a color and make a little dot. This is just white paint. Right, just another design element. You're creating this like little fantasy mushroom world. Now, what I really want to do after I finish this is those little raised spots on the pink, we'll call it a hot pink mushroom. And I think what I'm going to do is let this dry. I'll grab my blow dryer. I won't make you watch. I'll come back after this is completely dry, and then we'll do something to kind of add some dimension to the mushroom cap so they're not so flat. All right, I'll see you back. But now what I want to do is accent those little raised areas up on the top of that mushroom. So I'm going to rinse my brush that had the gray, and I'm just dipping into some white paint. I don't want this to be bright white, so there's a little bit of black in it, just a touch. And if we don't like it, I can just go right over. With the kissing booth, which was the original. Look at how cute. Okay, so leave that to dry. And I'm also going to do a little bit, kind of hitting very, 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 very delicately. So you see how that looks and how that looks. And I'm gonna grab the blow dryer, and again, I'll be right back, and we're gonna get into some of the metallics. All right, these metallics are really cool. There's a link below. They're beautiful. They're just so metallic. And they're not like a wash. They're just really, really intense. I can't stress that enough. So I am going to, I think, like what I did over on this one, I started just with some silver, right, and put that around. I did put some paint over that. I think I'm going to try that first. So there's the silver, and I'm adding water, and you got to let it kind of sit on there and manipulate it a little bit to really get the cake of paint softened enough to really start picking up all of that wonderful metallicness. Got brushes everywhere. Okay, so looking at my other one, I think I'm gonna start at the bottom. Let's move this up so you can see, and just kind of brush that around. And you can stipple like this. And remember, if you don't like it, you can go back over with your paint. And I am going to do a wash on top of the pink. So I did dip my brush into some water before I started this wash so it isn't too metallic. This is fun. It's just a fantasy, right? And it's such a great exercise when you want to use all these fun products that we have, right? I just saw, there it is. I don't want the metallic paint on the background. All right, so look at that, right? Really pretty. Now let's try putting some on those little white dots. Let's see how that looks. So much fun. It's really, really fun. These metallic paints I'm just really impressed by. I've never used metallic watercolors before, and these are amazing. All right, that's all I could say. Now, what I want to do is maybe do a little bit underneath, but a real wash of this. So I just dipped my brush in water with whatever I had left. Very pretty. I'm going to dry this. I'll be right back. Alrighty, now we're going to add a little bit more dimension to this. I could paint on and on and on, which I might do. You know, it's like it is working on a painting. It's a three-dimensional kind of painting, right? So you could just keep going and going and going. But what I want to do now is just mix up a little bit of a gray wash and then hit the tops of stuff. So again, let's move this over, put these brushes in some water. And yeah, this is just white DIY paint and her black. And I'm looking at what I did to the other ones, so they kind of go together. But I'm just gonna brush on a little bit of gray. And what you can do if you feel like it's too much, right? I have an old linen cloth here, and I can just blot. And that just softens that mushroom. It's so metallic, right? It's so silvery. I just love this. And I can just kind of stipple a little bit along there. I don't know how it's going to look on kissing booth. Let me try something. And it does kind of flatten it out, but I like that. Try spraying that a little bit. Yep, and there we go. That's what I want. See what it did. So now, what I'm going to do, and I love that, I'm going to let this kind of just sit. When you do something like this, don't freak out, right? Like, oh, Jane, all the red's gone. Let it dry. And because you'll see it starts to pool, right? You're seeing the edge of that mushroom right there coming out. Just leave it alone, let it dry. If you want more of the kissing booth, when it's completely dry, you grab some of that and go back in. The more you layer it, the better it looks. Believe me, it really, really does. You know me, I'm having so much fun. So that is that. I am going to dry this one completely. We'll see how this looks. And then I'm going to put the ribbons on it like I have over here with this. I'll move my camera out so you can see the whole thing and see how our little dreamy mushroom world looks. All right, one little thing I want to show you how to do. If you want to soften the line or that wash I put over, I have some clean water, another artist brush. I have 65 million of these, and I just dip it in, and I can just kind of, or to remove a little bit of it, to kind of expose more of the kissing booth. You gotta just keep rinsing the brush. And the nice thing about this is as you're doing it, it just keeps it super soft. No harsh lines. Rinse. And I think that really gives it a nice look. Really nice look. So I'm going to cut some ribbon, and hopefully this will be dry by the time I get it cut. I'm using Hug Snug. We all love this, right? It's actually seam binding, but it just has this really vintage look. It's not that icky, acetate-y looking satin ribbon. I love satin ribbon if it's actual silk. This is inexpensive. It's made, I think, rayon, so it's just beautiful. And I just dipped it in water. That's me. That's why when I was a hairstylist, I was so organized, because you can't dip your comb accidentally into bleach, right? Okay, so I just lay it out a little bit. It gives me an idea. Well, is this, is it gonna work? I really like it. I wanted something very, very soft. So I wanted something really soft, right? And I think that's what I got here. The only other thing that I might do to, I don't know, finish it off a little bit more is add the white dots to this tag like I have here, because you could really see the difference there, right? And I want them to kind of go together. So I'll do that, and I may wax them. I may wax them, you guys. I absolutely love wax, and it will give them a kind of a sheen, but I'm not sure yet because I do have the metallic, and the metallic is really popping right now as they are. And give yourself some, some time to figure out what you want to do. You don't have to completely finish everything in one sitting unless you have some system where this is something you've made a bunch of times and you know the system of how you're going to paint that. For me, this is just a one-off, right? I got my mold. I wanted to make something with this mold, and I really wanted to use my metallic paints. I absolutely love these. I cannot tell you how impressed I am with those metallic paints. So that is it. Any questions at all, please ask in the comments. Oh, excuse me. Make sure to follow me on all the socials, because I will post some kind of finished pictures of these so you can see what they look like when they're all, I don't know, vignetted or put, with some pretty natural lighting and everything. Okay, I wanted to show you the difference between the waxed tag, and I'm going to show you how I waxed it, and an unwaxed tag, right? Because remember, I wanted to add even more dimension to this, but I still want to keep it light and airy. I don't want something really heavy. And I put on a very, very messy bow on the top in the seam binding, and I'm quite happy with this. So here's a close-up. And I added some clear wax and some dark wax to this. And there is a really big difference, right? It still reads light and airy, but it has more dimension to it. And I love the messy bow with it. I just think it looks great. Anything too perfect just wouldn't go with this whole aesthetic. All right, let me show you how I use the wax. So I just have a cardboard palette that I always use, and I'm using DIY clear wax. Put some there, and that's probably too much. Use very, very little wax. And then I've got a mixture of DIY dark wax and brown wax. And the reason I do that is the dark wax and the black wax. I add a touch of black wax to the dark wax because it cools it off a little bit so it's not too warm. And that's mixed right there. So first thing I'm going to do is apply a slip coat of the clear wax. So if the dark wax that I've mixed up is too dark, I can remove it. If I don't apply a slip coat, it could stain the whole piece. So I'm just using these inexpensive, these are Amy Howard at Home natural bristle brushes. I've had these for years and years and years. They're indestructible. They're like way better than a chip brush, but they look like beefed up chip brushes. All right, and I'm just emulsifying the clear wax onto my brush. And then I just brush this on all over. And this wax is great because it isn't a wax that you put on and then you have to wipe it off and it's, you know, a whole production. It is not like that. I won't use waxes that I have to wipe some off and hope for the best. All right, so there's my slip coat of clear. And then I'm just using a little small, Again, an Amy Howard at Home. This is like a 1-inch brush. And I'm going to dip it in the clear, and actually I'm not going to dip it in. I'm going to move some of this clear over here. And get rid of that. And I'm just going to lighten up the dark wax just a little bit. Grab the tag, and I'm just going in, and I'm going around, right, around the mushrooms, the toadstools. And then I'm just going to kind of feather on just around the edges. Now you kind of have to finesse this a little bit. So you see me moving my brush around, stippling. And then I have just an old linen cloth, and I can move this around a little bit, right? So if I want to take some of it away from the stem, I can do that. Comes off, turn, right? Always keep using a clean section. And you know you've got that slip coat, so you don't really need to worry. Because as you see, I'm just lifting off the dark wax. And there it is. And of course, this technique can be used on furniture, on anything. I love, 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 love wax. And I just think it's great. It's like I'm almost using it like a glaze here. It's just a lot of fun, and it adds so much dimension. So that's it, you guys. These are finished. Well, imagine what this one looks like when it has its little bow up on the top. Give it a shot. Get those molds out, you know, those things that you have hanging around, and use them. I'm so glad, because I've been holding on to this mold of the Toadstool mold for quite a long time, and I just said, I've got to make something, so I did. Any questions at all, please ask in the comments. Make sure to subscribe, and of course, as everybody says, hit the notification bell so you know when I come out with a new tutorial. And if you're interested in kind of going deeper into authentic furniture paint finishes, join the Surface Anthology membership. It's just $27 a month. We do a very, very detailed workshop each month, also a live tutorial, also a Q&A. We have a raffle, all kinds of good stuff. And it's an amazing community of really, really talented and creative women who are so supportive of each other. It's really, really wonderful. All right, everybody, take care. Happy painting. See you next time.